Nation. So that's one question I'd like to know. Another question I'd like to know is if we're worried about access, are we stuck with the option that you gave for McCaslin? Do we have to go with an underpass? Or if it's something that's to be used once every 100 years or something, can't switchbacks up to McCaslin be a perfectly adequate option? And for the kind of access we'd be talking about, very infrequent, or improvement of a dirt road for that second access? Those are just a couple questions I had.
Second Avenue Bridge, George, probably, I think it's an old county road, or it goes back quite.
I'm not talking about the bridge, I'm talking
This-
about the homes and properties.
Yeah, the Second Avenue Bridge you asked, when was that? That's,
No, the homes and properties that are in the floodplain.
oh,
Before it was designated floodplain, or were they built after it was designated a floodplain?
I couldn't answer that, I don't know. I know the houses were built probably in the 70s on that end of town.
so I know the floodplain started being regulated in the 70s or so.
Do you know?
Any of the newer structures will probably abided by the floodplain after that whole flood FEMA things were coming down. So I don't think there were mistakes made that they didn't know about where the floodplain was. I think they were built, the ones in the floodplain were probably built before a floodplain was designated.
You know that, or you're
No,
speculating?
I'm speculating.
Okay, because it's $2 million and to all the residents for 7 or 17 properties, and I think it bears a look to see how they became that way. That seemed worth asking the question in any case, but you're not sure the answer. I'm not blaming. I'm just asking.
Sure.
No, we'd have to go back and look at the building permit records to see if we could determine when those houses were built. And then based on that, and when the floodplain regulations started, we'd be able to tell you.
And what about the difference in cost between, getting a second access up to McCaslin through infrequently used road that will be okay for emergency vehicles and people within our town versus something that's significantly more engineering and underpasses and whatnot?
Sure.
And I have one more question then.
I think for the short term, we've talked about, what happens if that bridge goes out this summer, and we want to be prepared in terms of, do we not get into that? Up through private property, there's a driveway that we could use. What we would do if this goes out right away is private access that it has a gate, and we would get the police department to cut the gate off, and we get people out. It would be an emergency. Okay, but we're going through private property. We think it might have been a public use type thing, that it's been open to the public for a number of years, and that maybe should be a public road through long usage. So there's that. It's not a very good road. It's not something.
But for a
it gets people
100-year
out
flood,
from-
it doesn't have to be.
Right. So it's not a very good road. It doesn't have good access with McCaslin. So it's not, from a permanent second access standpoint, it's not a very good solution. I'm not proposing that we build this just for the second access. This is more connecting neighborhoods. It's a trail access. We've got development over here. We want people to get to it without going through McCaslin. So,
But if we're talking about these problems, I was...
right. This to me is something we would want to do anyway, and when we get ready, when we do that, then we have another way. And so long term, we could solve that. That's
Then my other question was, if we do replace the Second Avenue Bridge, how long would that be out of commission and people driving, I'm not sure how?
Maybe I'll add to your first question
Thank
as
you.
well. Our study did look at access off of McCaslin by placing the fill, the earth that would be dug out of the channel, and using that material as a ramp off of McCaslin for emergency access. We talked to the fire department. They said we need a 10% slope, so we calculate out how much dirt that is. That's $300,000 or so worth of just dirt, but we would have that dirt from this project. So,
And put it on someone's private property?
well, we would have to
Sorry,
deal
I'm
with
just
all
asking.
that. All of this is going to take private property approvals, as well as Second Avenue and Third Avenue and transitions. You know, we are going to be needing right-of-way. So we did look at those options. And then, I'm sorry, your second question?
How long would Second Avenue Bridge be
Yes.
gone?
The plan would be to build the structure in halves, so that you would demolition and take out half of the structure and leave one lane of passage across the creek. So you would have, you know, construction signs and possibly construction flaggers and directing traffic across, but you would build one half, and then you would flip traffic over to the newly built half, then you would build the second half.
Thanks.
And how long, or just an estimate on the construction time or something like that?
We haven't estimated that, but I would think it's going to be in the several months type frame.
Can you do it like from spring, like late spring until the early fall?
Yeah.
Is that doable?
So what, brings me to my last slide. Okay, so anticipating, when can we get this thing done? This is a schedule looking at we can't get it done this year, but looking at before flood season next year, what we need to do to get something in place so it's operating by then. So working back, maybe a 6-month time frame, getting construction going in January and having at least, not the complete done, but having usable opening for the floodplain by June of next year. And then backing up, how much time do we need for design? We do have some environmental clearances out there, there's Pebble Mouse that we have to deal with and so forth. So, taking from June of this year to December to do the design, get a contract awarded, and stepping back, getting a finance plan in place, looking at approvals and looking at public meetings. So that's why we're coming here today, that here we've developed this options. What do you want us to take out to the public? Do we take all 4 options? Do we want to get public input because we're changing the creek that they, in the back of the home. So we want to get public input. We want to come back and have you approve the plan and then go to urban drainage. Now, we don't have funding. Again, urban drainage doesn't have funding in 14. Their funding comes, a little bit of funding, but the bulk of their funding comes in 16. So if we're looking at getting this done, we would have to upfront a lot of the costs and get paid back. So there's
But that would be
some
okay to pay back something that already got built? That that's okay to pay back something that already got built?
We could do it that way.
Okay.
It's not common to do it that way.
Yeah, it sounds funny.
But we could.
So, I mean, if you want it done, this is a kind of schedule. If you want to slow it up to match the funding, we can put this on the back burner.
Chris and then Joe. It certainly seems like option 1 is the best one, biggest bang for the buck. But if we ever end up building any commercial or retail on the Rogers property, wouldn't that be accessible from 2nd Street? And could that potentially create too much traffic on 2nd Street where we would want to have entry and exit on 3rd Avenue?
I think if, in that scenario, that's when we would look at aligning that access with the intersection into the town center.
Exactly,
So
right.
it would become a full movement intersection at that point on McCaslin. So you would have access to Rogers from that intersection and to the town center.
Are you saying from the underpass?
No, right there.
Roundabout. From the
Right
castle?
there.
Oh, that.
Yeah.
So you're going to
Right.
split the traffic, some of it here and maybe some of it coming off a second.
But still, even if you split it, potentially, it could create considerably more traffic than that subdivision is used to. Wouldn't it make sense to have another exit point on 3rd Avenue, or no?
You mean another
Yeah,
bridge?
yeah,
But this is something we can always do incrementally, too.
absolutely. And planning out, far ahead, I think that we'd want to consider that now. Joe?
Yeah, I just was wondering about the channel improvements on this side of McCaslin. What impact do they have on Coal Creek on the town center side of McCaslin? And,
On the town center side?
yeah, is this changing the flow that's going to go over to the east
It
side?
all eventually gets through.
Yeah, is it going to increase the flow over there? Or?
Normal times?
I think think the biggest impact to the town center side is going to come from this US 36 improvements in the culverts that they're, will be installing at that point, under 36.
And my guess is that the flow limiting step there is when it goes underneath McCaslin, so that the
I'm
volume
just
percent
kind of
or
hoping
whatever.
this all works together.
So,
And a massive drainage waste study that's going on now will look at all those impacts. the whole
Because
entire-
the other part is the east side needs a lot of cleanup as well as the side.
a question and a comment. So, are you anticipating doing any drop structures or anything like that within the creek to the west, or is this just cleaning up what's there in some more bank work, I guess?
We looked at the slope of the channel, and based on that value and the substrate in the creek, cobbles, gravels, et cetera, it appears it will be relatively stable at its current slope. However, with every project like this, when we do channel improvements, we will look in detail at the slope of the channel, and if drop structures are needed in order to flatten the slope of the channel between the structures, those would certainly be engineered and included.
And so it seems like there's various parts that can be done, and I think you said it could be done incrementally. When do you think that we could just do the channel improvements? That seems like there's some benefit there just with that, without building the bridge.
These pieces really can be built in components. Because the channel improvements address the upstream section and Second Avenue Bridge replacement addresses the Second Avenue properties, it really becomes a prioritization of the town and funding of which one you want to do first versus second. They both serve their kind of individual purpose.
So it seems like if we could accelerate that somehow, that would give some benefit right away compared to the rest of the costs. So, and just a thought, I think it should be presented. My personal preference is actually for option number 4, where we build both bridges, understanding that we might not ever get to the point where we'd be able to fund that, but it seems like that has the biggest bang for the buck, and I think it addresses some of Trustee Hansen's concerns. I think I share those concerns as well.
If there's a half and half cost share.
So I guess the question is whether or not urban drainage would be
Right.
willing to look at that. That's a pretty big chunk of change there.
I can address that. I think I'd have to talk about that with staff back at the office. The difference between Second Avenue and Third Avenue would be more putting in for transportation purposes. Second Avenue, what's nice about the Second Avenue bridge is you're addressing the drainage problem and the transportation problem at the same time. You get to widen the bridge section, have a wider road section, and sidewalks and all that.
Okay.
So is that a yes or a no?
So Third Avenue,
If,
that might be difficult for us to help fund, because I would see that as more of a transportation-related project. It's not solving a drainage problem.
no, that makes sense, what you're saying.
So I think my recommendation would be, and I don't want to take all the time here, but would be to then say, let's go out to the neighborhood and see what's your preference between building Third Avenue and taking out Second, or redoing Second. There seem to be in the same sort of ballpark range of cost, so, and we could see what people's thoughts are about that.
Yeah, if the board feels okay, I would recommend that we set up a public education meeting sometime in March.
Yeah.
Just like,
Alex has got that.
Yeah, that's what I'm planning. I just, we can take all 4 options out. If Third Avenue, if you thought Third Avenue was out of there, then we take it out. But we can leave all those options out, go out to the public and get their feedback, and then return to you in April, with what we've heard and what a plan would be. Okay.
I would say that they already sort of tested this by including this discussion in the first transportation meeting with Sagamore and Original Town
Right.
last week. I thought that was a good idea on that. So,
The other thing I want to make sure you understand, these channel improvements are going to change the character out there, and I think we want to give the neighbors a feel of what's going to go on. There may be a maintenance access, and we're going to have to acquire rights to get into their backyard. So, we want to get that feedback from the public that this is going to happen.
Right.
So,
Lisa?
So when this goes forward, it seems to me we need to not presume that a change has to be made. I don't know is it legally required that we do something to address the floodplain?
Is it required? Well, I think,
I'm just asking if it's legally required, because citizens may, the bulk of citizens may or may not think we should do this. And so it seemed to me we should have a zero option or a minimal option or a something option that addresses maybe getting out of the way of a flood rather than addressing the flood. Not that it's necessarily my preference, I just think we have to lay that on the table as one option that citizens have a right to choose. That would seem to me to be appropriate, but I'm not going to go mad over it. I just think I would be kind of peeved if everyone said, here, we're going to give you 3 ways to spend $2 million, or 4 ways to spend $2 million. Take one or not. I mean,
So
take one.
Is your option 5 then to do nothing, basically?
Well, to do nothing or to do an escape route.
Well, that's
It's not
doing-
just, I mean, I'm just trying to represent the
I think that that's totally fair to do the no-build option in there. My guess is, though, eventually we'll need to do some bridge work, and if Urban Drainage is willing to partner with us, this would be a cost-effective way of doing that.
And then maybe what we should do is instead show the half costs or something like that. So, or the price, and then minus the match, and then the revised price, and that might make them more appealing.
Can I offer up a suggestion that maybe there is 2 more options? 1, we do nothing, or 2, we only address the transportation issues and not the floodplain issues, if that makes sense.
The emergency access.
And we wouldn't get the match for the transportation only ones.
Right, I understand that. I mean, saying that is, I'm thinking about what was the original goal here. And so I'm just adding in that other option where it's just the transportation.
And it would look more expensive, and people can choose, yeah.
So it sounds like we need a little bit more information. I mean, I think that you hear that there's interest in presenting this to the public. I guess the piece of information we would need to know from the staff of Urban Drainage is whether or not option 4 or whatever it is even really something that they would participate in. Because if it's then an extra $2 million or whatever it would be on our
before
dime,
they
then...
provide funding, but they're not going to provide 50% of the whole thing. Maybe they
Correct.
provide a lower level.
Make an estimate of those calculations.
So can I-
Say, pick your bridge.
I'm pretty confident we wouldn't be able to.
Okay. So
Providence and Second Avenue.
Yeah.
That's the majority of the work going on.
Yeah.
If Third Avenue gets thrown in, then I don't think we're going to do that.
Okay, so, well, Third by itself, you look at,
Third
though.
by
right?
itself.
Yeah. So it seems like, unless the board feels otherwise, I mean, we have the no-build, we have just the emergency access business, or we could just present either, do you want it at Second Avenue, or do you want it at Third Avenue? And just let us know.
I think I'm the emergency access and nothing, but I think Deb was an actual bridge for escape without running a flood.
My thought
It's
is
a real road.
that you're addressing the transportation issues and not the floodplain issues. So that's an option.
Okay.
In other words, the end goal.
And I think we need to start our board meeting. So Alex, for the public education or going forward, I think it'd be important, just like Trustee Skumat said, to have actual amounts of what Urban Drainage is willing to contribute for the different options. So we really know what are our numbers for every single option, so that's pretty clear. That makes it a little easier to make a decision based on
And
those
show that
factors.
match explicitly. I think that
Yeah.
makes them more attractive.
And then to thoroughly vet this with all the options, including the no-build option, you have to have a community-wide meeting, not just an original town Sagamore meeting. It's got to, maybe you again have to have 2 meetings on this. One, to hear from those affected,
I mean, if we
But
have
I-
one community meeting where...
make it community-wide and not just, I think it can be accomplished by one community-wide meeting. Don't limit it to just,
Thanks, I was assuming that, but I'm glad you
Right.
explicitly said that.
So let's wrap up here, but I just want to make sure that you feel like you have some sort of direction of how to proceed.
Lots.
We talked a lot, but I'm not sure that we made a decision.
Yeah, I think the the no-build option, make sure that is, and then the transportation-only option. I think the funding part of it comes back to the board, whether the public needs to weigh in on that, but, and then...
Well, it's good for us to know, at least.
But we'll go with urban drainage and look at those options, what parts of those will they pay for and what parts won't they?
Great.
Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah,
Very well
fantastic
done.
presentation, really enjoyed
Very
it.
well done.
Great work, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So let's take a couple-minute break and then start the regular meeting.